morning, everybody. So today I want to talk about oaths, bonds, and initiations. Very, very interesting topics. It's very chilly here in South Africa at the moment. Heater's going, as you can hear in the background, and I've got my big thick jersey on, so I'm good. All right. Now, concerning oaths and bonds, we find that in our modern age today, we often make promises and don't follow through on those promises. And we tend to think, that it's okay. If we break a promise, it's just going to hurt the person maybe, and, they'll get over it. But there's more to oaths and bonds than just making a promise to somebody or a promise to do something. And breaking it can be quite severe. Especially when we look at the heathen traditions, and even if we go into Crowley's work in Thelema, there's a lot of talk about oaths and bonds and the severity that can come of actually breaking those oaths and bonds. But we tend to just make these promises in life. We'll promise this person we'll do this and we'll do that, and we don't do it. We even promise ourselves to do it. I'm guilty of it as well. I think everybody is. But if we look at it in a more in-depth way or in-depth aspect of spirituality, then we should be taking our oaths and bonds and our promises quite seriously. So before you actually make a promise or you make an oath or a bond, definitely think about what it means. Can you follow through on it? Can you complete the tasks that you are promising to complete? If you can't, then don't promise. Don't make an oath or a bond. If we have a look at the heathen, the old heathens, the Nordic folk, etc., they used to take their oaths and bonds quite seriously. And the reason being is that when you make an oath or a bond, or as I say, a promise, we talk about promises nowadays, but a promise is an oath or a bond. You are bonding yourself to that promise. You are making an oath to do what you promised to do. And when you make a promise or an oath or a bond, then you are actually tying your energy into the well of weird, according to the heathen folk. And by tying your energy into the well of weird, you have to complete that task. Now, if you don't complete it, or let me just this way, if you don't succeed in completing the task, but you tried everything you could possibly do to complete it, you have still gone through the process of attempting it, of trying it as best you can. That doesn't mean you've broken the promise. But if you get halfway through and you just stop and think, I can't be bothered to do this, it's just too much work, I obviously didn't think this through properly, and then you just drop it, then you've broken the oath. Now, what happens if you don't complete the oath? Or you just drop it halfway through? What's going to happen is that you're going to have ropes or ropes appearing along your way, along your path, along life, and they're going to keep tripping you up, and they're going to continuously keep bringing you back to the task until you've actually completed it. So we find that with promises, we make these promises before we're born, before we begin this life, but also during our life we make promises, and this ties in very much with the true will. So before our birth, we make certain promises. So at some time in our life, we'll probably find that we reach a stage where our true will actually kicks in, or the promise that we made before we were born, and we then have to abide by this oath. And this can be quite disruptive, especially in a magician's life, somebody who's following a spiritual path, because we have to maintain a certain role in life where we are making money, we are trying to raise a family, we're trying to keep a job and keep a career going and things like that. Then all of a sudden we have this promise that we made before we were born, irrelevant to what life was built, and all of a sudden it's a complete disruption. We're going to change our life completely. Now, this doesn't happen to everybody. Some people will just slide nicely into it because what they've built up previously kind of falls more or less in line with this promise that we made. But for other people, it could be a complete disruption. But you don't really have a choice. Your true will and your holy guardian angel comes along and waves this piece of paper in front of your face and says, "Hang on, you made a promise. You've got to stick to it now." So, not much you can do really. It's just if you try and resist it, it's just going to keep hammering you over and over again until you finally give in and just accept what is. But this might actually seem like an injustice. Like you made a promise and you weren't aware of what would happen up until this point. So you can't really keep this promise anymore. And you might feel resistant. You might feel angry about it. You might feel that it's just completely unfair that this is happening to you. But if you actually just give in and stop resisting and follow your true will, then once you start doing that, then abundance just starts coming into your life. You can resist year after year after year, and you're just going to struggle and struggle, and eventually you give in, and all of a sudden there's all this abundance in your life. So don't resist it. Basically, just if it happens, just don't resist it. And the thing is, especially for someone who's following magic or spiritual path or something like this, and they gain all these magical skills over years and years of practice, and then all of a sudden this promise kicks in, and your true will comes along, and depending on what it is, obviously, it's different for everybody, but all of a sudden you can find all these magical skills just disappear. Everything that you've worked for years just stops, and your true will then continues, and you just carry on from that point onwards and build up from there again. But it's kind of like starting all over again, and I've started all over again a few times. Recently I just went right back to the beginning of my magical practices and just I'm now doing something that's completely different to what I've done in the past 25 years. But anyway, another person that actually experienced this quite severely and wrote about it quite nicely was Aleister Crowley. Now, Aleister Crowley died poor and lonely, and people often criticise him, saying that if he was so powerful and so he had such powerful magic and magical skills and what have you, that he shouldn't have died poor and lonely. Why did he? And people would criticise him and say that he just became irresponsible and squandered everything. But if you actually read in Liber 4, part 3, he actually says, specifically swore that he would renounce his personal possessions to the last penny. Also that he would allow no human affection to hinder him. So this is part of the promise that he made before he was born, and his true will came along and it kicked in, and now it was time to actually make good on his promise. And he followed it. He had to follow it. He knew he had to follow it, but and he did regret it. People took from him, they stole from him, people deserted him, and he became lonely, and his heart cried out, for the love he felt for people, but there was nothing he could do, because this was his true will. It was a promise he made. He actually, if you read chapter 16 of the Oath in Liber 4, Part 3. It says, "Yet more awful is the doom that he hath invoked upon himself in renouncing his right as a man to enjoy the love of those whom he loves with passion so selfless, so pure, and so intense in return for the power, so to love mankind that he be chosen to utter the word of the Aeon for their sake. His reward universal abhorrence, bodily torments, mental despair, and moral paralysis. Yet he who hath power over death, with breath to call back health, with a touch to beckon life, he must watch his own child waste away month by month, aware that his art may not anywise avail, who hath sold the signet ring of his personal profit to buy him a plain gold band for the felon finger of his bride, that worn widow, the world." So, if you're going through this, don't think you're alone, because you're definitely not. And it can be tough, but as I say, don't resist if it's happening to you. Just go with the flow. Just give in and just let it happen, and abundance will come into your life eventually. Then we move on to initiation. There are two types of initiation. The first one is a group initiation, and the second one is personal initiation. And personal initiations, they kind of happen spontaneously, usually, and they happen repeatedly. Initiation basically means a new beginning. Well, first we'll talk about group initiation. So a group would be something like a coven or an order that you get initiated into. And what happens is you get connected to the group mind, sometimes called the current, sometimes called the egregore. Now, when a group of people get together who follow the same beliefs, believe the same things, basically flowing in the same direction with each other, then they start to create a group mind. I have spoken about this previously when I was speaking about egregores. But this group mind can grow. More energy that gets put into it, it grows bigger and bigger, and it can become sentient. It can actually, when it becomes an egregore, it can actually go off and bring new knowledge, and then pump it into the group. So it's quite an interesting topic, actually, if you actually really look into it. But with initiation into a group, a coven, order, etc., it's not. There's some groups that will do quite a ceremony about it. Some groups that will just say, "You are here, thank you very much," and you're in. But some groups will actually connect you to the current. And it's usually the high priest or high priestess. So the ceremony itself would involve passing the knowledge from the hand of the initiator into the forehead or the head of the initiatee. Is initiatee a word? I'm not sure. Anyway, I think you know what I mean. Now, it's not passing of power from one person to another. It's actually the initiator is connected to the current, and then what he's doing or she is doing is connecting that person to the current by energetically pulling the current through themselves into that person and connecting them to the current. Now, once they are connected to this current, it doesn't mean that they're all powerful and they have all the power that everybody else in the coven has, or all the knowledge. They just have access to the current itself, to the actual power, to the egregore, to the group mind, and they can download from that group mind. But in order to do that, they need to be trained. They get trained beforehand, they get connected, but then there's a lot of training afterwards. Because if you suddenly start downloading all of this knowledge and all of this intent, all of this power, it can blow your mind. You'll become completely insane. So what happens is they then have to go through training, and usually, quite often what happens is once they've been opened up to the current, they are then blocked again. Their chakras get blocked, or not blocked, but they get controlled by the leader of the group, and slowly over time they become opened, bit by bit by bit, so that they don't get this huge influx of knowledge and power and information, but it just slowly over time it starts to come in. They are still connected to the current, they can still access it, etc. But it's just a preventative measure, just to make sure that they don't go completely insane and have all kinds of psychoses and whatnot. Very much like, suddenly opening or suddenly awakening your Kundalini energy. That burst of energy that explodes into the head. If you don't do it progressively and move the energy up the central energy channel, then you're going to get this explosion into your head, which is it creates psychoses, headaches, neck pain. People become schizophrenic. It's not really a good thing. So it should be taken slowly. All of these things should be taken slowly, just to prevent, insanity, really. Then we get into the personal initiations. Now, these can happen in several ways, in various ways, and it's a personal initiation, so it is personal to everybody. Everybody's different, so it's going to be something that is very, very personal to you. And it can be something gentle. It can just be moving from one aspect of your spiritual practice to another. You discover something new, and it's like an advancement onto what you had previously. So you move into this new current, this new flow, and this new practice, and this becomes a new beginning. So it can be as small and as gentle as that, or it can be quite severe, like a shamanic death. And I found there are two types of shamanic death. I love the topic of shamanic death, so I may go on and on about this. I'll try and keep it as short as I can. Now, with shamanic death, you do get your vision death. Let's call it that, a vision death. It's not a physical death. The second type is a physical death. No, near-death experience. But with the first one, with what I'm going to call the vision death, it can come in a vision quest. It can come in a dream. It can come while you're meditating and you lucid dream or astral project, or some kind of visionary manner in which it comes. And it's usually where your body gets ripped to pieces, and it's usually a trickster that comes along. Coyote is quite often used as the symbolism for this, because obviously, being shamanic. I mean, everybody associates shamanic with Native Americans, when actually it originated out of Russia. But anyway, regardless, but it's usually some kind of trickster god. The trickster god is very important in many aspects of our spiritual journey, because the trickster is the one that actually teaches you the lessons. But anyway, this spirit or trickster god, whatever it may be, comes along, rips you to pieces, and then cleanses all the pieces, and then puts you back together. And usually when they put you back together, there is often a piece missing, and that piece then gets filled with power. And it's that power-filled part that makes a person a shaman. Then you get the second type, which is your physical death, your near-death experience. Now, what happens here is the person becomes ill or gets struck down. And the striking down, I found actually quite often, is done by lightning. I actually met somebody online years ago. She'd been hit by lightning 3 times. I wouldn't want to go through that myself. Mine was a bit different, but anyway. Yeah, I wouldn't want to get hit by lightning personally. But anyway, and I've found a few people who they got hit by lightning and survived, obviously. And this is it's you get struck down somehow in that manner or through illness. Um, and what happens is you go to a place. It's a liminal space. It's a place between places, and it's the creative void. Now, this creative void is literally a void. You don't remember anything. Nothing exists there really. You don't exist there. You're not a person. You don't have a name. You're nothing. Absolutely, simply nothing. And nothing is there. Nothing exists. Now, what happens if somebody's dying? They'll go to this place and then they'll pass through it. They'll go to heaven or the lower worlds or whatever their religious beliefs actually portray. But now what happens with this person who's to become a shaman? They have to fight for their lives, and they have to start remembering, well, just basically remembering really. So they might remember that they are actually a person, and they may remember that they have a personality, and then they'll remember, oh, I have a name, oh, I'm male, so they start remembering these little bits more and more and more, and then that brings them back, and they may see a vision of deities or spirit guides or something like that in this creative void, just before they come back. And then when they come back, it is a very traumatic experience. So what happens is you actually experience what's called soul loss, or in South American traditions, specifically like the curandera, the shaman, the bruja, they sometimes call it susto. Now, this soul loss happens with every trauma, major trauma. So, if somebody goes through a traumatic experience, car crash, fire, something similar to, something major, a piece of their soul actually gets taken out, and it gets placed in the underworld, in the lower worlds, and this is the trauma itself. Now, if we carry the trauma with us, we wouldn't be able to function in life. So this is what happens: a piece of the soul gets removed, and it gets put in the lower worlds, and it's quite sad, really. I mean, it's like this little child who's terrified. But what gets replaced in that area is disease, dis-ease. And so what a shaman's job would be to actually travel to the lower worlds, seek out this portion of their soul, and then coax it back to come back. I mean, it's terrified. It's huddled in a little corner. It doesn't want to move. Doesn't want to go anywhere. Just wants to stay there and just die, really. But it has to be coaxed back. So the shaman coaxes this little piece of the soul back, brings it back, and then usually blows it into the soul, which then pushes out the disease and makes the soul whole. And this is what the whole process of soul loss retrieval, soul retrieval is. Now, in the case of somebody who goes through a traumatic experience in order to become a shaman, being struck down, going through illness, and actually going through a near-death experience, that portion that gets taken out, and usually filled with disease, is taken out but then filled with power. It's the shamanic power that they bring back with them. And this is how shamans are made, really. And it's a type of initiation, which is obviously why I included it here. Now, this doesn't just happen in shamanic, I can't really say shamanic countries, can I? Because, I mean, shaman is just really an epithet. It's just a word that describes a particular type of person. But you know, we can move the whole concept over to Europe, to Britain, into traditional witchcraft, and we sometimes talk about the cauldron of the dark goddess, and the cauldron of the dark goddess is, if you get taken through the cauldron, it's a very similar process to the shamanic death, because as you pulled into the cauldron, you are cleansed and you're made anew, and as you come out of the cauldron, you're given new knowledge. So it's very similar to the shamanic death, where you are ripped to pieces, cleansed, put back together with new knowledge, new power. So you know, you find these concepts through all traditions and paths, in some way, form, fashion. So now, just to end, I'm going to end the same way I ended this chapter. It's a piece of prose that I wrote years ago. It's a symbolic representation of a personal initiation that I went through, long time ago. Will you dance with me in the shadow of death? Fondle the bosom of the crone, so that she will yearn for your young seed within her dark womb. To walk in the darkness that brings nothing, no memory, no being, no time, no space. Would you like to cry out with me in agonizing and ecstatic pain to the horned one? Allow him to fill your head with his cunning fire until it seethes and shakes your body, as it heats your blood and resounds through your bones, until you are pulled from the darkness and presented with the illumination that his flame provides, that you may see through the cosmos to the other ends of reality. Will you allow him to rip you to pieces, limb from limb? Allow him to devour your rotten and stinking flesh? Will you allow him to smash his eternal hammer upon your being, and to set you in the fire that forges all things? Will you allow him to place you upon his anvil and beat you until you are made again, new, fresh, power-filled? Will you let the smith remake you from the dark womb of the mother? Will you dance with me in the shadow of death? Obviously, this was a time when I was following traditional craft quite extensively. Anyway, so that's oaths, bonds and initiations. Always an interesting topic and lots to explore in it, so you might probably want to go and have a look more into it. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, cheers.